at that, look at that, look at that, look at that!
10 years ago, I had this list in my head. I never dreamt that I'd get to the end of that list. So I've decided to end my River Monsters journey.
For 9 seasons, Jeremy Wade dragged us into the world's darkest rivers, coming face to face with creatures that looked prehistoric and deadly.
They just have such powerful jaws. I mean, that would take a serious-sized lump out of you.
River Monsters became a global sensation, exposing giant predators and shocking attacks that few people even knew were real. Then, in 2017, at the peak of its success, it abruptly ended. Fans were told he had simply run out of monsters. It sounded convincing, but it wasn't the whole story. Now, at 69, Jeremy Wade is finally revealing what truly ended the show, the part they never wanted you to know, and the truth is far more unsettling than any beast he ever pulled from the water. How a quiet British kid became the world's favourite monster hunter. To understand why the ending of River Monsters hits so hard, you first have to understand who Jeremy Wade truly is. He is not just a TV host. He's not an actor reading a script. Jeremy Wade is the real deal. A man who spent decades chasing his passion long before cameras ever followed him into the water.
There's one place where I'm going to find out just how big the world's catfish grows and how potentially dangerous it is.
Jeremy John Wade was born in Ipswich, Eastern England in 1956 and grew up in the small village of Nayland, where his father was the local vicar. The village had a river running right through it, the River Stour, and that strip of moving water became his real playground. As a boy of about 7 or 8, he would go down to the bank with cheap basic tackle and no real idea what he was doing. He later said his first attempts were total failures until a school friend showed him a few simple tricks. After he caught his first tiny fish, that was it. He stopped looking back. Whole days disappeared by the river. While other kids were off doing normal things, Jeremy was crawling through bushes, staring into dark water, and wondering what else was down there waiting. He was a quiet child, but his mind was loud. He kept asking himself simple, stubborn questions. Why are some fish so much bigger than others? Why do older people in the village tell stories about huge fish that nobody has seen in years? Why do some animals end up as monsters in local legends while others are just dinner? Those questions were not school homework. They were what kept him walking back to the river, even when the weather was cold and the water was brown and rough. When it came time to leave home, he did not chase drama school or a TV studio. He went to the University of Bristol and studied zoology. He wanted to understand how animals actually work, from the inside out, not just how to catch them. After that, he earned a postgraduate teaching certificate in biological sciences at the University of Kent and spent time as a secondary school biology teacher in Kent. On paper, it was a safe career, but the pull of unknown rivers was always stronger than the pull of the classroom. In the early 1980s, he finally snapped and did something most people would call stupid. In 1982, he took a small backpack, basic gear, and about 200 British pounds in his pocket and flew to India. That money was supposed to last 3 months. He slept on trains and in bus stations, lived on street food, and pushed into the mountain rivers of the Himalayas chasing a fish most people had never heard of, the Himalayan mahseer. Out there, in cold, fast water, he fought fish that could reach around 18 pounds, and every one of them felt like proof that this crazy idea might actually work.
It's almost an instinctive fear you get when you look at it. There's just something about looking.
When he finally made it back to England, broke and exhausted, he did not try to forget the trip. He wrote about it. Those first articles for fishing magazines, telling the story of a young Englishman chasing giant fish in the Indian mountains, were the start of a different kind of life. They did not make him rich, but they gave him one important thing: a reason to go back out again. Over the next 2 decades, Jeremy Wade drifted further from the safe path and deeper into the kind of places most tourists never see. He went back to India, then on to the Congo, Brazil, and other remote corners of the map.
Were you fishing for these or?
No, barramundi.
Barramundi. And right.
I've got everything but.
Right.
He caught malaria more than once. He was threatened at gunpoint. He even survived a plane crash during his travels. At times, he was arrested because local authorities thought this strange foreigner poking around their rivers might be a spy. None of that made him stop. Most of the time, he was living cheap. Tents, village huts, rough guest houses. He ate whatever people in the area were willing to share. He learned enough Portuguese to talk freely with fishers in Brazil and picked up French and Spanish along the way. In the early 1990s, he co-wrote a book called Somewhere Down the Crazy River, which became a small cult classic among serious anglers because it told real stories about huge, strange fish in places like the Congo and India.
Look at this.
arapaima on a fly. This thing...
But outside that world, he was still almost invisible. By the mid-1990s, he had quietly turned himself into a specialist nobody had asked for, the guy who would travel to almost any river on Earth if there was even a small chance of a giant, unexplained fish at the end of the journey. That was his life, long before anyone pointed a camera at him. He was not trying to build a brand. He was chasing a feeling, that mix of fear and excitement you get when the line goes tight. And you know there is something very big and very unknown at the other end. Then, in 2005, he returned to India for a new mystery. In the Himalayan foothills along the Kali River, he began hearing stories that were darker than the usual fishing tales. People had been dragged under and never seen again. Some locals blamed spirits. Others whispered about an enormous catfish that had developed a taste for human flesh.
It's about, 9 or 10 foot, something like that?
It's bigger than that.
Jeremy did what he always did. He listened, he watched, and he started to follow the clues. That investigation eventually pointed to a real suspect, a huge species called the goonch catfish. Working with local people, he landed a massive goonch that weighed well over 100 pounds. The fight was brutal, and the story had everything: mystery, fear, science, and a real animal big enough to match the legend. Somewhere in the middle of that trip, Jeremy looked at what was happening and realised something important. This was not just another fishing story. This was something anyone could find gripping, even if they had never held a rod in their life. Producers from Icon Films in Bristol and executives at Animal Planet noticed the same thing. They saw this quiet British angler who had already spent decades getting sick, lost, and nearly killed in remote rivers, and they saw the goonch case as a perfect blueprint.
Just the absolute perfect predator. Huge mouth on there. Huge mouth.
Take a real biologist and extreme angler, drop him into real local stories about attacks, disappearances, or legends. Let him investigate like a detective, then try to land the creature at the centre of the fear. No staged fights, no actor in a studio, just a man who had already been doing this alone for 20 years. That idea became River Monsters. The first episode aired in early April 2009. Almost at once it exploded. The premiere drew about 1.3 million viewers and became the best series launch in Animal Planet's history. Within weeks, the show was ranking among the top cable programs in its time slot. By the end of the first season, every episode was averaging more than 1 million households, and the network suddenly had a new star and a new flagship series.
Look at those teeth. Look at those teeth. They just have such powerful jaws. I mean, that would take a serious-sized lump out of you.
A big reason it worked is that it never felt like a normal fishing show. Each hour played more like a crime story. It usually started with a rumour or a real attack, a diver torn up in a reservoir, villagers losing relatives in a fast river, a child pulled under and never found. Jeremy would travel to the scene, talk to witnesses, walk the banks, and test different suspects. Maybe people had blamed the wrong fish. Maybe the threat was smaller than people thought, or much, much bigger. Only near the end, after days or sometimes weeks on the water, would he finally hook the true monster and bring it up out of the murk for everyone to see. The animals he was dealing with were real giants. In Southeast Asia, the Mekong giant catfish can grow close to 10 feet long and reach weights of more than 600 pounds, making it one of the heaviest strictly freshwater fish on record. In 2005, a famous specimen from Thailand measured about 9 feet and weighed roughly 646 pounds. In the Amazon, the arapaima is a massive air-breathing fish that can reach lengths of around 10 feet and weights of up to about 440 pounds, though fish that large are rare today. It comes up to gulp air, so when a giant arapaima rolls near the surface beside a small wooden boat, it looks like something left over from the age of dinosaurs. Then there is the giant freshwater stingray, a flat, ghostly animal with a whip-like tail and a venomous spine that can be longer than a grown man's arm. Recent records from the Mekong River show stingrays that can stretch close to 13 feet from snout to tail and weigh about 660 pounds, making them strong candidates for the largest freshwater fish on Earth. On River Monsters, these species were not background decoration, they were the stars. Jeremy treated them the way other shows treat lions or great white sharks, as powerful, dangerous animals that deserve respect. He used his training in zoology to explain how they hunt and how they fit into their rivers, but he kept the language simple and focused on what people could see. Teeth like knives, jaws like a bear trap, armoured scales that could stop a spear. When the fight was over, he almost always cradled the fish in the water until it was ready to swim away. Viewers could tell this was not some glossy setup. There were missed strikes, snapped lines, and days where nothing much seemed to happen. He got soaked, covered in mud, stung, and sometimes hurt. That rough edge and his awkward, honest style made people trust him. He was not selling gear or posing as a superhero. He was exactly what he had always been. A slightly shy, very stubborn man who would go to the ends of the earth for one good fish.
For Gandhi and Katak, every trip down the Babai is a new challenge.
With every new season, the show's reach grew. Articles in TV magazines called it the most successful series in Animal Planet's history. Some critics compared Jeremy to a kind of river-based Indiana Jones, trading whips and treasure for handlines and murky water. But even in those early glory years, something else was happening that most people at home did not notice. When Jeremy talked with local fishers, more and more of them would tell him the same thing in different words. It used to be easier. The big ones were harder to find. The spots that had once been reliable now felt empty. He found himself travelling further, staying longer and working much harder for each catch.
Now I'm trying to find out if it's bold enough to target a full-grown person.
Sometimes he returned to rivers he had fished decades earlier and felt in his gut that they were not the same. For the millions watching at home, River Monsters was mainly about one question. Is the monster real, and can he catch it? For Jeremy Wade, another question was slowly forming in the background. What happens when he goes back to a river he knows well, throws in a line, and there is nothing left to fight at all? That quiet worry growing behind the fame and the record ratings is where the story of River Monsters starts to bend in a very different direction. The hidden problem that ended River Monsters.
Of all the river monsters I've ever encountered, one has got under my skin more than any other tigerfish.
In his early trips, Jeremy Wade talks about busy fish markets, long lines of big river fish laid out on tables. Years later, he would return to those same towns and find fewer boats going out, much smaller fish on sale, and more plastic trash stuck in the reeds. He noticed the same pattern all over the world. On big Asian rivers, he heard more stories about dams blocking the flow. On stretches of the Amazon, he saw fresh scars where illegal mining had chewed up the banks and turned clear water into thick brown soup. Even without any charts or graphs, he could feel the change just by talking to people and tying on a hook. Scientists have now put numbers on what Jeremy was seeing with his own eyes. Groups like the World Wildlife Fund track animal populations over long periods. Their latest major report says that, on average, populations of river and lake animals have dropped by about 83% since 1970. That number is so big it almost sounds fake. If you had a river with 100 chunks of wildlife 50 years ago, now you would have about 17 chunks left. A huge global study released in early 2025 went even further. It looked at more than 23,000 kinds of animals that live in fresh water, including fish, crabs, and dragonflies. It found that about 1 in every 4 of those species is at high risk of going extinct if nothing changes. That means whole types of fish and other river animals could simply vanish from the wild. The biggest river giants are getting hit the hardest. A team of researchers looked at what they call freshwater megafauna, which basically means the really big stuff. Huge catfish, giant stingrays, massive turtles, and so on. They found that worldwide, populations of these big animals have dropped by about 88% since 1970.
Look at that, look at that, look at that, look at that! Ah!
In some parts of Asia and Europe, the losses are close to total. When you strip away the scientific language, the picture is simple. We block rivers with dams, we pull out sand and gravel from the riverbed, we pour in sewage, farm chemicals and factory waste. We overfish, we change the climate so rain patterns flip, then we act shocked when the giant fish disappear. The scary part is that many of the monsters that made River Monsters famous sit right inside this crash. Take the Mekong giant catfish. A century ago it was found all along the Mekong River and fishermen were pulling in hundreds of them each year. Today it is listed as critically endangered. Conservation groups and river scientists say its numbers have crashed because of heavy fishing and dams that cut off its migration routes. A recent study on the Mekong's big fish found that the largest species have shrunk by up to about 40% in length and more than half in weight over just a couple of decades, putting them into what the scientists called a death spiral. Then there is the giant freshwater stingray, one of the most unreal-looking animals Jeremy ever tangled with.
And roughly 400 pounds, this female stingray is by far the largest river fish I've ever seen.
In June 2022, fishers in Cambodia caught a female giant stingray in the Mekong that weighed about 661 pounds and measured around 13 feet from nose to tail. It is the heaviest strictly freshwater fish ever recorded. On its own, that sounds like great news, proof that giants still survive. But the same scientists who tagged and released that ray warn that the species as a whole is endangered and faces heavy pressure from overfishing and changes to the river caused by dams, sand mining and pollution. In the Amazon, the famous arapaima faces a different kind of threat. Illegal gold mining has spread through large parts of the rainforest, especially in countries like Brazil and Peru. These operations use mercury to pull gold out of the mud, and that mercury ends up in the water and then in the fish. Recent scientific reviews show worrying levels of mercury in many Amazon fish, including arapaima, and say local people who eat a lot of fish are now exposed to dangerous doses over time. So the same rivers that once gave Jeremy some of his most iconic catches are now delivering a slow, invisible poison to both fish and people. For most viewers at home, names like Mekong giant catfish, arapaima, or giant freshwater stingray are just wild creatures from a TV show. For Jeremy, they are old neighbours. He remembers when they were easier to find, when markets along those rivers had more big fish on the tables. Coming back years later and struggling even to see one turns every new shoot into a quiet alarm bell. This is where the job he loved started to clash with the way River Monsters was built.
There's the trace. The fish is going to be visible very soon. There, see the bubbles? Oh.
Things like sewage, factory waste, illegal mining, dams and climate change do not make for quick, neat scenes. You cannot solve them in 45 minutes and then send them safely back into the water. They are slow, messy problems that build up over years. To explain them properly, you need time and you need to sit with uncomfortable facts. River Monsters rarely had that time. It was honest about the animals it showed. When Jeremy explained how a certain fish hunted or why it sometimes bit people, he was drawing on real science and decades of field experience.
This is the biggest complete specimen of Zoophactinus that's ever been found, and all the way down here, giving a total length of 18.5 foot.
But there was only a small space left over for the larger story of what was happening to the rivers themselves. The format just did not leave much room for long talks about mercury, dams, or collapsing fish stocks. Meanwhile, the official story of why the show ended was very simple. In 2017, Animal Planet announced that the 9th season of River Monsters would be the last. When Jeremy spoke about it in press coverage, he did not blame the network or hint at a fight. Instead, he said something that sounded neat and final. Some shows can run forever, but their subject matter was limited. He explained that about 10 years earlier, he had a list in his head of all the river legends and giant fish he wanted to chase. By the time season 9 was complete, he said that everything has been ticked off. Put simply, the public line was, we made the show we promised to make. We went after the big, famous river monsters, and we caught them. There just were not enough new ones left to build more seasons around. But over the same stretch of years, Jeremy's off-camera comments were taking on a different tone. In Q&A sessions and interviews, he began to talk more about damage to rivers and oceans. What he did after River Monsters ended makes that even clearer. In 2018, Jeremy returned to Animal Planet with a series called Jeremy Wade's Mighty Rivers. From the very first description, the focus was not monsters but the rivers themselves. The show's own summary says there is dramatic evidence that some of the world's best-known rivers are in declining health and that Jeremy's now investigating why their giant fish are disappearing. Across 6 episodes, he looks at rivers like the Ganges, Yangtze, Mississippi, Danube, Amazon and Zambezi. The problems are no longer side notes. He walks viewers through leaking oil pipelines along the Amazon, heavy industrial pollution on the Yangtze, overfishing and sand mining on the Ganges, and big dams changing the natural flow on the Zambezi. A year later came Jeremy Wade's Dark Waters. On the surface, it looked like a return to mystery fishing. The episodes talk about strange disappearances, weird lake stories, and elusive fish in North America and Europe. But the show spends a lot of time on polluted lakes, invasive species that do not belong there, and rivers where something feels off beneath the surface. The monsters are still there, but now they share the screen with algae blooms, blocked migration routes, and fish that are sick or missing. Then he moved into saltwater with Mysteries of the Deep, a series on Science Channel and Discovery that follows him as he digs into famous ocean puzzles, shipwrecks, vanishing boats, odd sonar signals, and so on. Even there, human influence keeps showing up, whether it is war debris, industrial accidents, or wrecks linked to storms and changing seas. Most recently with Unknown Waters with Jeremy Wade on National Geographic, he has returned to exploring fish in lesser-known places. The show makes it clear that some species, and even the large sizes they once reached, are becoming rarer every year. It is the same man, the same calm voice, the same love for strange animals in wild water. The difference is what he shines the light on. So when people repeat the line that Jeremy Wade ended river monsters because he ran out of monsters, that is only part of the picture. Yes, from a TV point of view, there are only so many giant river legends you can build a season around. But at the same time, the man at the centre of that show was watching his favourite rivers lose their biggest residents and fill up with trash dams and poison. But that wasn't the end of the story. In many ways, it was just the beginning of something much bigger. How river monsters changed the real world. By the time River Monsters reached its later seasons, it was no longer just a strange fishing show on cable. It was running in over 100 countries in reruns and on streaming, and whole families were growing up with Jeremy Wade as the man who pulled nightmares out of brown river water and then let them go again. What surprised Jeremy most was what started coming back the other way. He has talked about the messages he gets from viewers who say the show pushed them towards science. On one big Reddit Q&A, people told him he had made them care about fish and river health in a way they never had before. In other interviews, freshwater researchers have said the same thing more bluntly. One biologist studying large river fish said that watching River Monsters as a teenager helped push him toward a career in fisheries science. For Jeremy, that kind of feedback hits a nerve because he knows how ignored river fish used to be. Conservation groups point out that animals living in fresh water are some of the most overlooked on Earth, even though they carry a lot of weight in real life. The United States Geological Survey notes that inland fisheries make up more than half of all fish caught for direct use as food. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization says those fish are a daily protein source for hundreds of millions of people and support the jobs of millions more who live along rivers and lakes. So when a loud, dramatic show about river monsters makes kids say, "I want to study fish," instead of, "I never want to go in a river again," that is not a small thing. It is one of the ways a program that started as pure adventure quietly slid into the middle of a much bigger story about food, work, and how people see the water that runs past their homes. The impact was not only in classrooms, it showed up on the rivers themselves. Guides and outfitters in places that hosted Jeremy have talked about a clear river monsters effect. On Canada's Fraser River, a sturgeon guiding company that worked with the production later reported that their business exploded. They hosted more than 4,600 guests from over 27 countries in a single year, and openly credited TV exposure for turning their stretch of river into a dream trip for anglers around the world. Stories like that are good news for local towns. More visitors mean more full motel rooms, more meals sold, more fuel bought, and more people who now know that a certain river even exists. They also give local communities a strong reason to keep their big fish alive. A giant sturgeon or catfish left in the water can earn far more as the star of a catch and release photo than it ever would on a dinner plate. That logic sits at the heart of a lot of monster tourism. But nothing in this world is simple. The same spotlight that helps can also cause trouble. Biologists who study large fish have warned for years that catch and release is not magic. Long fights on heavy gear and long stretches out of the water can leave big animals worn out, stressed, and sometimes dead, even if they swim away at first.
It's still fighting me. It's still fighting me, this fish.
Studies on large river fish, including sturgeon, show that air exposure and rough handling raise the risk that a released fish will die later from injuries or stress. When a show like River Monsters sends thousands of viewers to one famous stretch of water, it can create a strange balance. On one hand, there is money and attention that can help pay for research and protection. On the other hand, there is a constant stream of people who want their own fight with a giant, sometimes in places that were never ready for that kind of pressure. Jeremy has said more than once that one of the reasons he supports strict rules on gear, handling and local catch limits is because he has seen firsthand how quickly a secret spot can get crowded once the world knows its name. There was another kind of impact that he never planned, and this one bothered him even more. It was the fear. From the start, River Monsters leaned on scary words. Episode titles talked about killers and mutilators. The opening shots often showed murky water and nervous locals. That was the hook that got people to stop channel surfing. Over the years, some scientists and writers began to push back. Marine biologists who work with sharks, for example, have argued that shows which frame animals as man-eaters undo years of work trying to show that most large fish do not want anything to do with us unless we corner them. Health experts have made similar points about certain smaller species. One travel medicine paper called out TV programs, including River Monsters, for hyping the tiny Amazon fish called the candiru as a horror creature that swims into people's bodies.
about a fish that lives in the Amazon that is capable of swimming up a urine stream into a human being.
Even though verified cases are extremely rare and most stories are hearsay, the authors worried that this kind of focus distracts from real health problems in the same regions, like poor sanitation and unsafe drinking water. Jeremy has not run away from those complaints. In his own book about the show, he admits that there are sensational elements and dramatic scenes built for TV, but argues that without a strong story, almost nobody would tune in to watch fish at all. In later interviews, he has been very clear about what he was trying to do. He wanted to get people who normally do not care about rivers to sit down, watch, and then maybe think twice before they see every large fish as a mindless threat. That is also why, as he has grown older, he has put more of his weight behind groups that work on freshwater life full-time. Jeremy now supports the conservation initiative called Shoal, which was set up with the help of the charity Synchronicity Earth. Shoal focuses on strange and often ignored river and lake fish, the ones that never make it onto posters but are in deep trouble. In talks connected to that work, he has said that freshwater fish are like an orphan branch of conservation, even though they are vital for food and culture in many countries. In other words, the same man who once pulled giant fish up for a global audience is now spending a lot of his time trying to keep their smaller cousins from disappearing quietly. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.